Welcome to another weekly featured business brought to you by Visibility Impact and your host, James Moffat, where he will gracefully take our featured guest on a personal and business journey and stories that will inspire, educate, and engage you.
Hello and welcome to another Friday featured business brought to you by your host, James Moffat, myself. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗪. So for those that don't know Dr. 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗪, then there's a great opportunity to get to know him. And you'll be amazed with some of the stories that are going to come out on the journey. So we will take Dr. 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗪 through a journey from his childhood to where he is now, any memorable moments he wants to share throughout the childhood, and any turning points that affected basically his life to the position and what he's actually doing now. We'll talk about that as we go through. But before that, we always kick the show off with a song from our local singer. She's normally does it live, but unfortunately she can't make it today. She's doing a summer camp with the kids. So she's got a recording. So I'm just going to switch over to the recording. We'll play that. Right. Congratulations. Well done, Emily. Although she's not here to see that, she'll see the recording. Did you hear it okay or not?
Yes.
Oh, okay then. Right. So, Dr. 𝗪𝗪𝗧𝗪, you are our 91st guest. Congratulations and welcome to the show. Now, I always ask the guest if their number is significant with them, because a lot of the times the number, I say, oh, you're our ex-guest. And they say, oh, that's my magical number or whatever. Does 91 have any special meaning to you at all?
Nothing that comes to mind, but 9 definitely is in the kind of spiritual tradition. I guess it's a number of masteries. So I kind of feel like, okay, maybe that feels like that's the path I'm kind of moving on towards that self-mastery.
Excellent. Yeah, numbers didn't really mean anything to me until I started having vivid dreams about numbers, and then I started to look at what the numbers actually meant, and then it kind of all made sense. So thank you for being our guest, and yeah, I've been following you and your work for the last couple of years. And I'm actually amazed with what you do. I've learned so much. And that's why I was eager to have you as a guest, because what I've learned and where I am now on my personal journey, I think this would be beneficial to everybody that wants to understand a bit more about kind of what's going on behind the illusion of what we think is going on. So welcome. So let's just, before we get going, let's take us back through a journey, because anyone that will watch this afterwards may want to know, well, who is Dr. 𝗪𝗪𝗧? And rather than just jump straight in and talking about what you're currently doing, I normally take my guests back through memory lane and back to their childhood and where they're from and a bit about them. And then we'll kind of pivot across to what you're doing now. So if you could tell us, first of all, where you are now, where you're now living, and where you originally from.
Sure. I'm living now in Tennessee, Eastern Tennessee, a part of the United States. I'm originally from Melbourne, Australia. I was born and raised there. My father was a refugee. He was a Sunni Muslim from Albania. My mother was a Roman Catholic from Italy. And so their marriage was a pretty tumultuous one. So it was very conflictual, different value sets, like a clash of civilizations. It was like I was watching it unfold. And I think it kind of like influenced me in terms of my future career of conflict resolution, because I saw just how destructive conflict can be if people aren't able to talk through and negotiate these kinds of basic skills. So that was something that kind of influenced me very early on in terms of my life direction. Another thing that also very much influenced me back in that time when I was I was about 10, 11 years old. This was back in 1969, was Erich von Däniken's book, and movies or documentaries started coming out, Chariots of the Gods. And that just totally fascinated me. I was really absorbed by that information, and I was wanting to essentially meet the space people. I mean, as soon as I saw that, and there were some movies. My favorite at that time was The Day the Earth Stood Still, and I had a burning passion to meet the space people. So I thought, well, the best way to do it was to finish school, go to university, and that helped me get through a lot of the dysfunctionality of my family background, and eventually, finished high school, getting into university, and I wanted to be an astronaut. So I applied twice to the Royal Australian Air Force to join, to be a pilot. And when that didn't turn out the way I wanted, I then decided, well, the next best thing is, okay, well, I'll go back to university and get qualifications to work in this field of conflict resolution. And so that's what I did. I eventually got a PhD in international conflict resolution and got some jobs working at different universities, the Australian National University in Canberra, Australia. Then I got a full-time position at American University in Washington, DC. Okay. And that was all focusing on international peace and conflict resolution.
Right. Excellent. Just before we go there, you mentioned trying to get into the Space Academy and be an astronaut. So you said you tried twice. So what happened then?
Well, they said they did a personality profile on me, and they said that my personality wasn't a fit to be a pilot. Well, it wasn't fit in terms of being a pilot, but I was a good fit for being a navigator. And so I was given that option of like, well, do I want to join the Air Force as a navigator? And I thought about it, and I thought, well, my reason for joining the Air Force is to be an astronaut. And if I can't become a pilot, well, the likelihood of becoming an astronaut is kind of slim to nothing. So I said no, and then traveled to Europe. And then when I came back from Europe, got involved. Well, started a different university track. I previously had got a Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics and physics, thinking that would help me in the path of becoming an astronaut. Now thinking, well, that's not going to help me much at all. So what is it that I feel called to? And I was called to understanding peace studies. And so I studied the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King, that I was kind of like directed into that. And that took me down this journey of international peace and conflict resolution, trying to promote non-violence in resolving international conflict. So that's how that began, that particular journey.
Right. Did you have a focus at the time of where you wanted to go besides being an astronaut? I mean, was it you wanted to be an astronaut because you wanted to go to the moon or to space, or what was the fascination about wanting to be an astronaut?
It was a means to an end. It was, to me, I thought that becoming an astronaut is the only way I could meet the space people. And in that time, in that formative era, all I knew was that I had this burning ambition to meet the space people. And I didn't have any kind of memories of being a starseed or having met extraterrestrials, or I just had this passion to meet the space people. And that was a very strong guiding influence through those early years. And, when you come from a dysfunctional family, people end up being very, they do self-destructive things. Like my sisters, none of my sisters, my sisters at the time didn't finish high school because they were suffering the emotional impacts of that kind of dysfunctionality. But I found this desire to be a very powerful guiding light to get me through that dysfunctionality so that I could go to university and get degrees, because I thought this was the only way I could do it. And so I got to that point where I applied twice to the Royal Australian Air Force, and they offered me that position. And when that offer came along, I thought, well, that road is now closed or has ended for me. Now I've got to find another path. And at that time, I had a kind of spiritual awakening. In 1983, 84, I went through a spiritual awakening. I read Lyell Watson's book, Supernature, and Reynold Johnson's book, The Imprisoned Splendor, back in 1983. And so that took me down this spiritual path. So I began meditating, reading theosophical literature, diving into that material, doing Vipassana courses, studying everything I could about Indian philosophy, and wanted to actually go to India and join a monastery, join the like the Ramakrishna movement or Sri Aurobindo's movement in India. So that was in 1983, 84. That's what I was wanting to do. And a good friend of mine was into this thing at the time called channeling. And so she was channeling entities and beings, and I was told that there's this Indian guru who is my guide from the other side. And so he was giving me advice, and I thought I'd get support for this idea that I would go to India and join a monastery and learn all about meditation and become enlightened and all of that. And he said, no, that's not your path. You're supposed to go to university, get more degrees, and get a PhD, and you're going to work in the field of international peace and conflict and your resolution, and you're going to focus on the philosophies of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. I mean, those were the names that were given to me. And so I thought, well, I know nothing about these people. So I had to educate myself and go through the process of learning how to write, because as a maths and science major, I didn't know how to write. I was a lousy writer. So I had to start at scratch and get a Bachelor of Arts degree and work my way back up so that I could actually learn how to do textual analysis, write analytically, and eventually write theses so that I could eventually get advanced degrees.
So what age were you at the time?
When I had that spiritual awakening, I was, that was 1980, 82, 83 that I had that. So I was 24.
Okay. And you hadn't finished it, you hadn't done a university at that time?
Oh, yes. No, I had finished a maths degree. I got a major in mathematics and physics in 19... what was it? I graduated in 82. I got and so in 83, I started, I registered for a teaching degree, a diploma of education, so that I would become a maths and science teacher. That was what I thought I should do given my qualifications. But 1982, I had completed a maths degree, a Bachelor of Arts degree, and then I went to Europe. I came back in end of 82, beginning of 83, and that's when I began to explore the spiritual literature and kind of dived into that, because I almost felt like a complete door had shut for me in terms of not being able to join the Air Force, not follow that path. And so I had to come up with a new path. And so this was where things were directing me. Okay.
So just kind of stepping that back a little bit. So you mentioned you come from kind of a dysfunctional family. Now, was that, I mean, you've got siblings as well. So, I mean, how many siblings have you got? And where are you within that sibling? Are you the eldest, the youngest, middle? And was it more your parents that were having this conflict with each other, or kind of the family? And did you feel you fitted in? And did you have, I'm asking kind of a few questions here, were you, any of your siblings kind of with you and thinking the same as you, or they were thinking, well, we got a weird brother here?
I was the oldest, and the dysfunction came from my parents. It was a cultural clash. I mean, he was a Muslim, and had a very Muslim way of looking at proper behavior from a wife. And my mother was a gregarious Italian from southern Italy, and she wanted to have fun and mix with people. So, there was a culture clash from the very beginning. And so there was a lot of
How many siblings? How many are you altogether?
There's 6 of us.
So even with this clash, you still had ended up with 6 kids.
Yeah. Well, that was also part of it. I mean, he wanted to have a big family, and she didn't want to have a big family. So that was another source of conflict. So, but in the Muslim culture, I guess having big families is a sign of status. I mean, and certainly there's a lot of value that he attached to the idea of having a big family and having a wife that would kind of play that role. But she didn't want to play that role. She had certain ideas about what she wanted to do, but so that was the clash. And so we were kind of like all bystanders in all of that. My sisters and I all got on well. I have a younger brother, but I have 4 sisters. And we all got on well. There was never any major conflicts between us. It was always the parents just not getting their act together, and we kids were like collateral damage.
So you were all living in Melbourne at the time?
That's right, yes. So we were all born and raised there. And that was very fortunate because the Australian government was very supportive of single mothers, because at a certain point my mother separated, and then divorced my father. And they were very supportive. And so, she got state subsidies, and she kind of raised us from that time, from 1969, which kind of coincided with my wanting to become an astronaut.
So 69 is a significant year for space travel, because wasn't that the Neil Armstrong year?
Yeah, exactly. It was it was a pivotal year. The landing on the moon, my parents separating, my desire to become an astronaut, all of that kind of like all seemed to happen in that year. So almost like that was a pivotal year. And certainly I feel that gave me a lot of direction for what was to come.
Okay, so the moon landing, I mean, there's been a lot of controversy about that. Did it really happen, or was it a studio? So knowing what you know now, what do you think it was?
I think there was a moon landing, but I think what they transmitted back was actually heavily filtered and edited, because I think they found on the moon a lot more than they bargained for. That, according to what I know now, they were greeted at the moon by very large spacecraft that was very imposing for the lander, for the Eagle lander. That was a very small tin craft that just kind of landed on the moon with oxygen supply, and
just something very primitive in comparison.
Yeah, and they were kind of like greeted there by these very large spacecraft that pretty much signaled that the moon was already occupied, and NASA were kind of like unwelcome visitors.
Right, we'll get onto that a bit later. So then, growing up, I mean, so you didn't get into the kind of the space academy, and then you pursued more kind of the university approach. So tell us a little bit about your career.
Sure. Well, I first got a degree in Bachelor of Science degree in mathematics and physics, and after that, when I found out that I wasn't going to be able to join the Air Force as a pilot, I then decided, based on the kind of information I was getting from, these readings that I was receiving, that I needed to retrain myself, get more degrees in philosophy, and really understand how the philosophies of Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King could be applied to resolving international conflict. And so that took me down that path. And so I became very focused on just understanding political philosophy. And so I got a degree in philosophy so that I got a Master of Arts in philosophy. And then I enrolled at the University of Queensland in Australia in 1989 in a PhD program where I focused on the philosophies of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi in terms of international conflict. And so that's when I really equip myself with an understanding of what conflict resolution is all about, how the nonviolent resolution of conflict can be achieved through a number of strategies, dialogue, negotiations, understanding human needs and interests. And so I was kind of immersed in that literature. And so when I finished with my PhD, I then applied and got positions at different universities where I would increasingly be focusing on international conflict.
And did you ever consider kind of working for a big kind of NGOs like United Nations or organizations like that to be kind of at the front line of conflict negotiations?
Yes, that was something that I thought would eventually happen. After my first full-time position at the Australian National University from 1994 to 1996, I then got a job at American University, and that was a full-time assistant professor. And I was there in that position for 5 years. And during that time, I got to work on a number of international conflicts. I did field work and raised significant grants from different NGOs. I got to do some consulting with the United Nations. So I got to meet some United Nations personnel. And the conflict that I was most known for in terms of getting grants and establishing a reputation in the field was the East Timor conflict. And that was a conflict that up until 1999, East Timor was part of this unitary state of Indonesia. And so one of the solutions to the conflict in East Timor, which had been invaded by Indonesia in 1975, it was previously a Portuguese colony. And then in 1975, Portugal left, and Indonesia pretty soon afterwards invaded. But in the meantime, the East Timorese set up their own independent state. They had an army. They just took over the colonial army that the Portuguese had left behind. And so that was a conflict I was very interested in. I did field work there in 1993, 1994. And I was really focused on bringing the different sides in that conflict together, getting people that had a pro-Indonesian perspective and people that had a pro-East Timorese perspective to come together and talk about the conflict and come up with a solution. And the solution that they came up with was actually, like, elements of it was incorporated into the deal or the autonomy plan that the United Nations actually submitted in 1999 to a plebiscite to the East Timorese. But unfortunately, the conflict had shifted so much that now it was no longer a choice between autonomy or the status quo of being a unitary state or being part of a unitary state of Indonesia. Now it was a choice between autonomy and independence. So the autonomy solution that I had helped craft with a number of people that was seen at the time as kind of groundbreaking and a way of moving forward and resolving the conflict, now was actually regarded not as a way of resolving this conflict, this intractable conflict, but now was considered to be a way of keeping the East Timorese within the Indonesian state. And so it was now the East Timorese didn't view it favorably at all. So they voted for independence. And so the independence that was adopted in 1999, the Indonesians withdrew, but they took a kind of like a scorched earth policy. They allowed conflict to just break out. And so there was a lot of destruction and a lot of animosity that was created. And that kind of like, because of the time and energy I'd put into resolving the East Timorese conflict in a peaceful manner, it led to me becoming very disillusioned by international peace and conflict resolution. I thought, well, you can spend years trying to resolve a conflict and then it all just goes up in flames because a few politicians make some bad decisions.
Yeah, I was just going to say that with bureaucracy, I mean, you can spend hours, weeks, years on research and then finding out kind of what was the root cause of the conflict, and then try to understand how you're going to resolve that. And then all of a sudden, kind of through bureaucracy, a politician or a government then can kind of overthrow all your hard work and then make a different decision. So it must be quite frustrating. I mean, when it came to picking something like that, did you select that I wanted to deal with that conflict? Or were you kind of allocated that there's different conflicts going on? Would you be interested in this one? How did that come about?
Well, it was the most logical choice at the time. I mean, when I got some grant money to go to East Timor, I was still at the University of Queensland, and Timor or East Timor is very close to Australia and actually just above the Northern Territory or northern part of Australia. So it was not a great distance to travel, and the East Timor conflict was of great interest to Australians. And so I felt that was really the most appropriate place for me to start. I had support from the Department of Government at the University of Queensland for that. They gave me some grant money so that I could travel there and begin researching the conflict. And then after that, I went to the Australian National University and I got some money from them to go to Kosovo in the former Yugoslavia to study that conflict. So I was very interested in different conflicts, ethnic conflicts in particular, the plight of minorities, whether they were religious or ethnic minorities, trapped in a larger unitary state who felt that they had very little in terms of rights and prospects for the future. So I began with East Timor, but I eventually did field work in Kosovo, also in Sri Lanka, because that was something that truly fascinated me. And up until 1999, I was very enthusiastic and was focused on, trying to understand these conflicts and promote conflict resolution. But after the events in East Timor towards the end of 1999, I was very disillusioned, and I began looking elsewhere. I thought, well, there must be another way of making the world a better place, because this isn't working.
Okay, so I know we can talk about this subject a lot, and I want to kind of get up to date to where you are now and how you got into that. So we kind of just fast forwarding a bit. So from Australia, where did you go next, and how did you end up where you are now? And just on that, I am assuming that, I've read through your notes, so I know, but you're married with children.
Yes. I have 2 children from my first wife, and I moved from Australia to the United States in 1996, and I took up an academic appointment, a full-time position at the American University in Washington, D.C. So I spent 8 years in Washington, D.C., and the first 5 years I was a full-time professor in international peace and conflict resolution. And towards the end of that 5-year period, that's when I grew disillusioned with what I was doing, that I no longer felt that international conflict resolution, that the things that I was teaching and the things that I had researched in the field and had been writing about, that I no longer felt that they worked. I felt there's something else was going on. And so I kind of began looking elsewhere. And so it was in that latter phase of that 5-year period, in particular in May of 2001, where I saw the Disclosure Project press conference that Dr. Stephen Greer had organized, where he talked about a cover-up of UFOs, that extraterrestrials were visiting us and that the government was not revealing this, and that a lot of things happening around the world were actually this kind of phenomenon being covered up. And so when I looked at that, I thought, well, this is incredible. I didn't know this was happening, that this kind of visitation could be occurring, and that a cover-up could be happening at that level. And that it kind of inspired me to dig deep into that information. And the deeper I dug into it, the more real it became. Initially, it was listening to 20 people talking about this UFO extraterrestrial cover-up. But as I dug into their testimonies and researched it, I realized that there was a much bigger picture here, and it actually dovetailed with what I had been doing, because now I realized that international conflict was not part of was not a dysfunctional aspect of a functional international system. That international conflict was actually a logical byproduct of a dysfunctional international system, and that this dysfunctional international system was by design. That there were powers that be that wanted the international system to be riven by international conflict, because this was a great way to hide all of these things that were really happening behind the scenes, and also generate a vast amount of money so that you could run these projects dealing with these topics without the general public and the mass media and elected representatives knowing anything about it.
So looking at that, you coming from a dysfunctional family, you understood kind of conflict, and then you got involved in war conflict in certain countries. Then, your guide that you met in India, did you go back and say that, because now kind of gone into the space program or space activities and in conflict and seen country conflicts being kind of a cover-up and a distraction from what's really going on, did you go back to your guide and you said, yes, you're on the right track here, and you needed to go through the kind of the country conflict to get a grounding to understand that, to go deeper and then to look at things from a different perspective? This is where you needed to be now on that journey.
Well, that kind of happened from around 1983 to about 1985, 86, that I was in touch with that guide. It was, as I mentioned, I had a friend who was like channeling or communicating with this Indian guide and giving me that information at that point. But kind of like the communication stopped around 86, and I just continued on making the decisions myself. But I kept up a regular meditation practice, and that kind of felt like I was being guided more from within. That was, I guess this was one of the things that I got from Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi always emphasized, listen to that small, quiet voice within. And so I kind of realized that in the work I was doing, learning about Mahatma Gandhi, his philosophy, and doing the meditation practice, that it was all about learning to look within, to kind of feel the guidance you were getting within, rather than becoming dependent on a kind of like an external guide that was being relayed to you by a third party. So it was a kind of like a bridge, if you like, to me, just reaching a point where I felt more confident that I was receiving guidance from within, and I could make the kind of choices I needed to make in moving forward.
Okay, so now that you live now in the US, did you go to Cape Canaveral? I'm assuming you did.
No, at that time, when I moved to the US in 1996 to 2001, I had forgotten all about the space people and wanting to be an astronaut. That was almost like, I almost thought of it as like a juvenile thing. I'd forgotten all about it. I was so fully focused on international peace and conflict resolution. And so that was my career. And, at that time, from 96 up until 2001, I was a full-time assistant professor, and felt that, there was a certain, public status you had from being a professor. I certainly felt it from family and friends that, that they kind of looked up to me, that I had a full-time position in a university, and that, I was doing press interviews and being interviewed on radio and television about international conflicts. And so I felt that was a career that was very worthy, and I felt that we had a lot of status. And so I was very happy with that up until, I said, the end of 99, when I felt that what I was doing was no longer working. And so then I began to grow more and more disenchanted. And by May of 2001, I was fully disenchanted. I was like, well, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be involved in international peace and conflict resolution. So where do I go? And so that's when I watched that Disclosure Project press conference, and it was like a new path was opening up. This path of looking at extraterrestrial life and a cover-up of UFOs. At first I was very naive, because I thought, wow, this is so exciting, that this is something that my university peers and superiors would be excited that this is real, that this is being covered up, that and this helps us understand the world in a better way. And so I was very naive, and I talked to my academic superiors, to the dean of the School of International Service. And I thought they would encourage this. And I got nothing but discouragement from what they were saying. And I was told to kind of like keep this interest in the background, that if I wanted to continue to be associated with the university in any way, not to talk about that topic. And so I had to make a hard choice in kind of like in the summer of 2001, whether I would take up another full-time position at another university teaching international politics, or whether I would pursue this new field or this new research interest I had in extraterrestrial life, but without a full-time academic position behind me. So I kind of like went for a middle path, where I arranged with the Center for Global Peace at American University to give me a research position. They called it, actually, now I struggle to, a research fellow. I can't quite remember at the time what they called it at the time, but it was a research position where I could continue to maintain a full-time status with American University, and in the meantime, I could pursue my interest in spirituality, conflict resolution, and in this new field, this new area of UFOs and a cover-up of extraterrestrial life. So my academics superiors kind of like gave me a little bit of breathing room where I could like explore a new way forward, because I said, I don't want to teach anymore full time. I need to find a new path forward. And so they kind of like, because I'd served with them for 5 years, my academic superior was very supportive. He said, I'll give you this full-time research position. And so you can continue to remain here at American University and you can continue to have an academic status, but you can kind of like find what it is that you want to do. And so that's what happened. And at the end of that kind of like adjustment, that from 2001 to 2004, I realized that this field of UFOs, extraterrestrial life, was something that I wanted to focus on exclusively, but eventually it meant that I had to make a clean break from the university.
You didn't want to fund that anymore?
Well, they considered it to be conspiracy theory, and they actually used the words, well, this kind of conspiracy theory doesn't have a place in a university. And so I was on my own. So in 2004, there was a feature story written about my research that was published in the Washington Post, where they talked about President Eisenhower meeting with extraterrestrials, that I had been doing research into that meeting and had come up with largely a bunch of people that had given testimonial evidence that they had been involved in programs or had heard or learned about President Eisenhower being involved in these diplomatic negotiations in 1954. Well, at that time, in early 2004, when I learned that, it was, my eyes just shot up wide open, because I just couldn't believe that there could have been diplomatic negotiations between an American president and extraterrestrial representatives. So that just totally shocked me. But the more I dug into that and researched it, the more and more the evidence supported that. And so when I wrote about it, the Washington Post was very interested. And so they wrote a feature story about it in early February 2004. When it was published, I was told by my academic superiors at the time, if this story is published and it in any way casts any kind of disrepute on American University, then my academic position would be cut, was threatened. And so sure enough, the story came out, and soon after I was told that kind of position, that program that I was trying to create, that had been terminated, and that my position would no longer be renewed. And so, come August of 2004, I would no longer be associated with American University. And so that's when I traveled to Hawaii, and then I met my second wife-to-be. And
so just pausing you there. So your existing wife at the time, you had children with your first wife, or was it the second, or from both?
Okay. I had children with my first wife. We got divorced around 1997. We got divorced.
How did she relate to, what you were doing in kind of the new study and the new focus? Did she think that you are a conspiracy theorist and weird, or did she accept it and kind of grew up with that, and she thought this was the right way, or you didn't talk about it?
No, this happened like 4 years before that. Like the Disclosure Project press conference happened in 2001. Okay. So in 1997, I was just full-time working on international peace conflict resolution at American University, but she was very unhappy with life in America. She left a very successful job in Australia to join me in the United States. So she was very conflicted by that, and unfortunately, the US had this very unfair approach to people like myself, where I got they called it a H-1B visa, where I could work in the United States, but my spouse could not work, which was crazy. She could not work legally in the United States. She had to kind of do it on the side. So she had been a very successful person in Australia. Now she was in the United States, so she was very unhappy with that situation. And frankly, I didn't blame her. It was terrible. I had no idea that the US did this to people that they gave work visas to, that they would give a work visa to one person, and they bring their spouse over, and their spouse wasn't allowed to work. It was dumbfounding, but that was the situation.
So I guess she went back to Australia.
That's right. She went actually back to New Zealand, because she's originally from New Zealand, but we had met in Australia.
All right. And your children, are they in the US or?
We had one child with both of us. One child was in New Zealand with her, and then the other child was with me in the United States.
Okay. So Hawaii, why did you go there?
Well, essentially, once my position in American University was terminated, my visa would run out, mm-hmm. And so I had to send my son to New Zealand to be with his mother, because he no longer could be legally in the United States come the end of August, and so I didn't want him to kind of miss his schooling. So he went to New Zealand to be with his mother, and I was all set to return, either to Australia or to New Zealand, depending on where things would take me. But at that time, I felt that my academic career was over, but I had this new passion, this new desire, and things were really unfolding in the United States. I had attended a few conferences, and I was my first book had been published on exopolitics in February of 2004. And so there was a lot of interest in this new field in exopolitics. So I was starting life there was a new path as an independent researcher that was starting up. And so I was invited to Hawaii to give a presentation at an event there. And that's where I met my second wife in Hawaii in 2004. So that was 7 years after the divorce with my first wife.
And you fell in love with the island?
Yeah, well, it was the island.
And your wife.
My wife, of course. And it was a wonderful place to be, to do this kind of research, because people were very open and very supportive. I mean, I wasn't a conspiracy theorist there. I was just like any other Hawaiian doing really strange things. It was very supported there.
Because you're quite sporty. I mean, I read in the notes that you like tennis, you like paddle boarding, stand-up paddle boarding.
I was into tennis and surfing and paddleboarding and snorkeling.
Wow, and a great place to do it. So you mentioned about exopolitics. So what is exopolitics, and how did you get the name, and where did that derive from?
Well, it happened kind of accidentally. At the end of 2002, in the beginning of 2003, when I was still with American University, I wrote a paper called "The Need for Exopolitics," and I had an academic website at the time, and so I asked permission from my academic superior, and I said, "Well, I've written this paper about exopolitics, what it is, and defining it, and the need for it in terms of how this can promote international peace and conflict resolution." So it was a paper. It was about a 10,000-word paper, and I wanted it to be published on my website at American University, and I was told no. This is we don't want you associating American University with this paper, and so I had to come up with a new website to launch this paper. And so and there was a process. I submitted it to to an academic journal for publication, and they said that, this is conspiracy theory, and we won't publish it, even though I had published previously with that same journal. So I recognized pretty quickly that this was going to be a tough journey trying to get this new research accepted within the academic community, because my academic department didn't want to be associated with it. The Journal of Peace Research that I had published previously with, I sent a copy of this paper to them, and they didn't even submit it to the referees. They didn't even submit it to be assessed. They just said straight out, the editor said straight out, this is conspiracy theory and we don't want to be associated with it. So I realized that I had to kind of like I had to do something independently. So I thought about it. Well, what is it? What am I doing? And I thought, well, I'm not really studying UFOs. It's not so much, and it's like it has to do with extraterrestrial life. And I thought, well, there's an academic discipline called exobiology where they study biology from the perspective of extraterrestrial life. So I thought, well, here I am, I'm studying international politics from the perspective of extraterrestrial life. So shouldn't this be called exopolitics? And so that's how I came up with the idea. Okay, I'm going to call this exopolitics. And so I bought a domain, exopolitics.org. Someone else had already bought exopolitics.com. So I certainly wasn't the first to come up with the idea, but definitely I was, apart from this other person, I came up with the exopolitics term. So exopolitics.org, I bought that domain, and so I then began publishing on exopolitics.org in January of 2003, and that website is still running. It's got over 1,000 articles and interviews on it, and it's more than 20. I think we're coming up to the 20th anniversary of that exopolitics.org
Congratulations.
Website.
Right. So within that journey, I mean, and what you're doing now, so I mean, it's not just about the website. I mean, you also do kind of your own interviews and podcasts and interviews with people. You've written a number of books. You attended different webinars and events, and there's a live event coming up soon. So, and also you've met other conspiracy theorists, right? Or deemed as conspiracy theorists that you associate with kind of sharing a similar journey and a history of kind of longevity in the way that they've been doing this for 10, 20, 30, 40 years in some cases. So mention a few names like Alex Collier and 𝗓𝗓𝗓, even I guess it's the granddaughter of Eisenhower, Laura, that you've also interviewed. So how did that all kind of come into play in, and how did you start meeting these people? Because I know you mentioned about spirituality, you've mentioned about kind of the space and UFOs and things. So how did you meet these people on that journey?
Well, I don't have any direct inside information myself, and I haven't had any kind of face-to-face encounters with extraterrestrials that I'm aware of. So, beginning from 2001, when I learned about this topic, I just kind of threw myself into it. And the more I did that, the more I wanted to learn what was going on. And so I had to, read the different books that were out there. I needed to interview people that had firsthand experience. And that was one thing I could relate to, because in my academic career, I did interview a lot of people. When I did the field work in East Timor and Kosovo and Sri Lanka, I interviewed people on the ground that were part of these conflicts. So I was used to interviewing people. So I began in 2001 meeting people and interviewing them and hearing their stories. And my goal was always to make sense of it all. And to make sense of it all from the perspective of creating a new academic discipline. In a way, even though I was booted out of the university, I still kept within my mind, I said, well, I still have that. I'm a trained academic. I write in a way that is understandable to academics in terms of, you source everything, you make clear what is your opinion and what is the testimony and the primary evidence and the sources, and so that anyone can confirm what you're writing about or what you're presenting. That was the approach I took, because that's the approach any political scientist takes, that you put together all of the data and you present your analysis, and while people might differ in terms of their analyses, the data is the same. And so that's what I wanted to do, is put together a body of data that any academic, that any political scientist could come to and say, oh, yes, I could look at all of this. So here's the transcript of an interview that with Alex Collier or with Elena Danaan or with Laura Eisenhower or with any of these people, and you could look at those transcripts and you could then come up with your own analyses. And certainly I think my analysis is one that I've developed painstakingly over 20 years now, but certainly other political scientists will come along and they will have a different take, and they will have new sources that they can complement. But that's the way knowledge expands. So that's been my approach. And so now what I'm doing is that I'm just interviewing more and more people, because a lot of these people, Alex Collier is a good example. He's been around for 30 years now talking about this. I've talked recently with Stuart Swerdlow. And there's a lot of people who have been talking about these topics for many decades. And what I'm finding is that a lot of these people, they've been doing it for 30 years, 40 years, and they're reaching the end of their lives. And so what I'm trying to do now is to interview as many of these people as possible to get their testimonies on the record, because these are valuable testimonies. These are first-hand testimonies of people that were involved in these programs or had face-to-face encounters with extraterrestrials. And so that's my goal now, is to interview as many of these people as possible so that I could put together a body of data, their transcripts, their first-hand testimonies of what they experienced, and that way people like myself and others can have a better understanding of the big picture of what's been going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I admire your work and what you're doing. And I follow you on different social media and your website and everything else. I think it is fantastic. And the deeper I go, the more it opens my mind up to things that kind of the impossible being possible now. But some of the interviews you've had are fantastic. You mentioned some, but from something that kind of started out as an aspiring astronaut as a kid to kind of going into learning so much more about kind of ETs and UFOs and secret space programs and what's going on. And then kind of with the expertise of people like Alex Collier and Elena Danaan, and finding out kind of a different angle to things and where they've approached it from is kind of mind-blowing, because it's kind of going down these never-ending rabbit holes, and the deeper you go, the more complex it seems to get. And just your last interview or a recent one that you've done was about time travel, and kind of that has blown my mind in trying to figure out how that could possibly be possible. I've watched movies like with Back to the Future and stuff like that, and seen the complications when you go back and you change something. Does it alter the future? And if you go to the future, then does it change, like what you thought was the present is now not the present anymore because it's been changed? So that is so fascinating. So you've gone into so much of this. So now, from being kind of that aspiring entrepreneur to knowing what you know now, and you're saying you're trying to catalog and capture all of that. So it's also information that people can share, particularly people that are hearing this for the first time and thinking, kind of what the hell's going on, is a great way to kind of take people back on that journey. And that's particularly why I wanted to understand your journey on how you got there. So how does that also tie into the others? I mean, because you all started at similar times, and it's kind of this generation that are talking about it now, and they feel more open to talk about it. Whereas before, it was always deemed you're a conspiracy theorist and you were shut down at every opportunity. And now, do you think people are waking up to this?
Yeah, it's been great to see how the scientific community has now come on board and is talking more about extraterrestrial life and the likelihood that it exists out there and what it means for us as a species. And now also you're having UFOs, or now the modern term UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, being treated seriously by the US Congress. That means that now what I'm doing is no longer conspiracy theory. So it means that universities can start looking at this, that people like myself that had an interest in this can talk about it within the university environment and actually get support and understand it to a deeper degree. So I'm looking forward to doing more work in the future with academics that are willing to kind of like dive into this field, because it is a very complex field. One of the things that really makes it in even more difficult to fathom for people is the time travel aspect that you just mentioned. I just did an interview with 𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪𝗪, who also is someone that's been involved in a lot of these time travel experiments. In the 1960s and 70s, he was involved. And, he's pretty advanced in years now and suffering poor health. So, again, he's an example of someone who, I want to get on the record in terms of being able to ask him questions and to see what he experienced. But one of the things that's becoming clear is that we, at this present moment in our history, are being helped by future humans. That's become very clear to me. That, in other words, humanity in the year 2030 or 2040 actually is time traveling to the present, time traveling even into our past, and seeding information, which is mind-boggling when you think about it. That in one of my books, I talk about it, Star Trek, Space Force, our Star Trek future. I talk about the possibility that either Gene Roddenberry or the guy that inspired him, Leslie Stevens, the creator of the Outer Limits, either one or both of them were actually taken from the 1960s into the 2030s, exposed to a secret space program or to the space program as it exists in the 2030s, which is very much like a Star Trek, and then taken back in time to the 1960s and said, okay, you now know the future or what can happen in the future. You have your opportunity now to kind of like come up with films and series to ensure that future occurs. So this is something that isn't science fiction. I think that this is exactly what has been happening, that people from the past or people in the present are being taken into the future by future humans. They're seeing the future, or they see a future timeline, and then they're brought back and said, this is what the future can be. You play your role into ensuring that happens.
Now, it's actually kind of mind-blowing. And you mentioned some of the books that you've actually written about this. So, I mean, I have some here, but maybe you can say about them. But you've got The Halls of Records, which is a portal to the inner earth and the ET heritage and the Galactic Federation. And I mean, there's some fantastic stuff here. The Space Force, I mean, but also more recently, the rise of the Red Dragon. And tell us a bit about that, because that was something very new to me. And I thought, what is that?
Yes, the rise of the Red Dragon really looks at the origins of China's secret space program, that China actually inherited a lot of the data and know-how of developing a secret space program by one of the founders or one of the principal scientists that was associated with the US Air Force creating its secret space program in the late 1940s, and in the analysis of these crash retrieval operations concerning extraterrestrial spacecraft. A Chinese scientist was actually working with this scientific advisory board that had been created by the US Air Force to study these things. And to cut a long story short, he was then repatriated to communist China in 1955 and took with him all of that information. And actually, he became the founder of China's conventional space program, but also he helped it set up a secret space program. So in my book, Rise of the Red Dragon, I look at the influence of this Chinese scientist, Dr. Shenshu Shen, and how he helped set up China's space programs, both the conventional rocket propulsion program that we know today that's been very successful, and also a secret space program that is building very large, exotically powered and propelled spacecraft that is developing an extensive presence in deep space at the very moment.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, this is fantastic stuff. Now, there's so much that we could talk about, and we could be on this call for hours and hours and hours and still want to talk about more stuff. Now, I kind of want to wrap this up, but I want you to bring us kind of up to date with kind of what's happening now. What are some events? I know you're attending in October in Orlando, your first live event for 3 years with some of the people that we've named. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about that. And also some of the significant things that that's been happening around the world at this moment. There are kind of markers there to show you that something significant is happening to humanity. And maybe 90% of the population don't see it, but for the ones that are more awake, they also feel that as well. So I just want to, maybe you can tell us about the event that's coming up and what that is about in October.
Yes, this is going to be a conference from October 21st to 23rd in Orlando, Florida, where Elena Danaan, Alex Collier, myself, Tony Rodriguez, 𝗓𝗔𝗖𝗛, and a number of others are all going to be speaking on these topics. This is the Galactic Gathering, I think is the name that they've given us. And it's a conference where a lot of people that are attending, they haven't been doing presentations for a long time. This is my first presentation in 3 years. Elena Danaan has never done a public presentation. Alex Collier, this will be his second presentation for this year. 𝗓𝗔𝗖𝗛, this will be his first presentation for the year. So this will be an opportunity for the audience to meet with us in person, and it's great that we can do it in Florida, where none of these kind of restrictions due to the virus that's been kind of like afflicting the planet for the last couple of years has had any effect. So it's mask free. You don't need any kind of inoculation or anything like that. So it's a great way to come and enjoy yourself, meet people, and to be inspired. And the thing about this conference is that a lot of these people that are attending do have direct connections with a Galactic Federation of Worlds, and so they will be involved in this in some capacity behind the scenes. Yeah. And I do kind of like monthly webinars. Every 6 weeks I do webinars. I just did one on time travel, temporal warfare, so people can find information about that. It's now available on Vimeo. They can just go to my website, 𝗬𝗢𝗨𝗥.org, and they can find about that webinar. And in the webinars, I try to kind of like give people an overview of a particular topic and what's going on. So in my last webinar, I did it on time travel, beginning with Nikola Tesla from 1895 to what we know today from different sources and witnesses concerning time travel.
Okay, excellent. So we will wrap this up shortly, but I always give the audience an opportunity to ask questions as well. So if you don't mind, if we could just hang on a little bit longer, and I'm just going to bring them in on the gallery view. And Michael, if this is okay with you, then anyone that's got any questions or you want to ask them any questions, right, Bojan.
It was impressive story that you shared with us about your life journey and what you do now. There are a lot of similarities. I wanted also to become an astronaut, but I flew from Bulgaria to Orlando, to Cape Canaveral. You can see on the recordings that when I was a featured guest. I'm a mathematician, and I was close to start my PhD, but I shifted more to the business side. So I'm not sorry for this, but this is what you're doing is very interesting, because the history of the humanity knows a lot of cases that they blame this or that, that he is doing like a conspiracy, but at the end it becomes the foundation of the future science and understanding. This is also very true with mathematicians. When I was studying that, when somebody invents a theory or theorem or something, it looks like totally like out of mind, but then in the future it proves that it's a foundation for a new science, let's say. So I really admire what you're doing, and opening actually whether people trust or not, it's their own opinion, but we need to free our senses to accept other points of view, which I think the classic, let's call it like classic science, they don't allow to go outside the border of what they put to. So it's not like a question, it's a comment to you, to what I had as a connection with you to your story. This is what I wanted to say.
Thank you. Very interesting parallels.
Rita, did you have any questions?
Not a question. I was just wondering, Dr. Sala, have you interviewed Eric von Daniken lately? Because that's where I live, actually, in his neighborhood. And he is not very well recognized in Switzerland. It's like the prophet in his own land, in his own country. But he built a kind of a park. It's called the Mystery Park here in Interlaken, where he asks a lot of questions. It's a public attraction. He built like all the old sites, like old pyramids, and then he's just asking questions. He is very active lately again, and I think it would be interesting to tie together some loose ends from where he came from and what's happening with the arcs now and things like that. It's just an idea.
Actually, a very good idea. I actually was interviewed by him about 6 months ago on his show. So he did interview me, and we had kind of talked beforehand that I would also interview him. So I did contact his assistant and said, I'd like to interview Eric now, and I haven't heard back, but I will follow up and set that up. But yeah, he would be a great guest, and he's got so much knowledge about the ancient astronaut theory, and of course he can add his expertise on this whole idea of space arcs that some of my sources have been talking about.
Exactly, that's what I thought of. Yeah, and I think he must know much more than he could ever say before. So maybe this is the time where he can, where he can speak about it.
Another remark or another similarity. You were working so many years in conflicts management. It's a very interesting area. And recently we set up a partnership with two other folks. And we have a project, actually we already have a prototype. We're building a conflict management platform. And the idea is not to manage conflicts on, let's say, nationwide area, but in small groups, in interpersonal, in the companies. And it's a very interesting field because I never been so close to the psychology and human-to-human relations. But now we are turning this psychology, science, and conflict management on a lower, let's say, scale to be something like a ready product in the future. So we are exercising some tests, etc. So this is another similarity I find, because it's also as important because humans, they have their own small wars. The nations, they have bigger, but maybe the way of fighting with this conflict, there is also a lot of similarity, maybe different mechanisms to deal with this. So
it's very interesting that you also have that interest because the more I kind of do this research, the more I appreciate that the extraterrestrials that are visiting our world have their own conflicts, and that these conflicts are also very intractable. And some people say that the Earth is like a mirror of the galaxy because we have so many different ethnic groups here, and that each of these ethnic groups has kind of genetic connections with one extraterrestrial group or another, so that our conflicts mirror the galactic conflicts. So if we can find a way of managing our conflicts, then the Galactics have some ideas for how they can manage their conflicts. So I think that is very significant.
We test this, what we're doing, it will be, when it has like a final shape, it will be really valuable for people because many, let's say, internation conflicts, sometimes it's close to few people's conflicting there at the end and the art to make them speak, talk, to calm down and to resolve. It's I say art because sometimes you push, but it doesn't, as you said, many years you spent to relax it, and suddenly it got jeopardized by some little move that triggers the fire. But very interesting. I checked the website. I will read through, and it was nice to meet you.
So, Michael, a question. So, have you ever been to Switzerland?
No, I haven't traveled. I was on a train through Switzerland back in 1982. That's about it. But I actually can't say I've visited Switzerland, but I do look forward to doing it. And one of the reasons I would like to actually, obviously I would love to see Switzerland, but I would like to meet 𝗪𝗡𝗦𝗪 there in person and do some interviews with him. That would be great to be able to kind of do some sit downs with him.
Well, I guarantee you'll have a huge audience if you come here, because there's many people that follow you and would be interested in seeing you. So if you did a joint event, I'm sure you could definitely make it worth a trip. And there's some beautiful and significant places here that you should be able to visit as well. When you mentioned about kind of space arcs, maybe there's some here in the lakes. You never know. So the kind of concluding now, we just kind of wrap up. So if people want to get hold of you, where is the best place? And I mean, I can share the link as well, but if you just want to say, is it your website or some other place?
The best place is to go to my website, 𝗬𝗢𝗦𝗧.org. That's been active since 2003. So everything I've done is there. More recently, I created another website for my podcasts, which is 𝗬𝗢𝗦𝗧today.com. So that's a second website where you can kind of watch more of the interviews. But if you wanted to kind of like see the full archive, all of the articles I've written over the last 20 years, then you can go to 𝗬𝗢𝗦𝗧today.org.
Okay, excellent. And I think Jane, did you have a question? You're on mute.
Okay. I'm aware of, I've listened in to some of Elena Danan's interviews with you, Michael, but I just wanted to ask the question quickly about the timelines and whether there is any consensus among the people that you interview about, say, the next 10 years. Do they foresee the channelings that they get, that there is going to be a converging timeline where we do have a greater disclosure towards our the Galactic Federation? Do they foresee that there is going to be that avenue opening up to us in terms of trade, or do they foresee there's going to be this splitting of timelines where you have people that are not willing to, as many talk about, ascend or awaken into a higher consciousness where people are, resonating a lot more with this kind of information? Will there be a splitting up of people who want to continue down this preserving of the system that we have? Or will we all eventually be moving towards a higher consciousness and opening up to this kind of information?
That's a fascinating area. I think that the whole kind of like separating timelines, that was something that has been around for a number of decades, and a lot of it was predicated on the idea of global destructive events that would kind of like precipitate this separation, people going in different directions depending on their vibrations. But what's happened, I think, over the last few years is that there has been a convergence of the timelines. And I think we are witnessing now, and we will witness, kind of like a great global awakening, that we're in the midst of that now, that everything that the deep state has tried to do to kind of like divide us and engineer conflicts and bring about some global catastrophe is failing. And that where we're heading, I think, is this awakening. Revolutions, I think we're starting to see it in Europe now. I mean, the farmers are starting to rebel, and when the farmers rebel, you can be sure revolution's not far away. And this has been predicted. I mean, there are people that looked at various kind of like I think the 𝗦𝗘𝗔𝗥 project is one example, but other futurists have looked at it and said that 2023 is going to be the year of global revolution. And I think that means that we are heading to this great awakening where people become aware of the deep state, aware that there's been this shadowy group manipulating us from behind the scenes. And the end result is that the masses of humanity will unite. And that will kind of like take us on this Star Trek future. And that, I think, is what's going to happen. That's the dominant timeline. And while there might be some groups of humans that choose not to join that dominant timeline, some splinter groups, I think the dominant timeline is one where we are going to be intact as a planetary civilization, and we are going to awaken and go into this Star Trek future where we get to be introduced to our extraterrestrial brothers and sisters. We learn about the suppressed history. All of the repressed technologies will be released. And so, it's going to be an incredible 5-10 years ahead.
Great, Thank you.
Yeah, I can't wait, because, I mean, as you mentioned, the suppressed and hidden technology that could have completely change the planet and the way that we use fossil fuel and everything else, which was completely unnecessary. Yet we're held at ransom because of that. And to release that technology now, that Tesla even tried to do, right? But there's been some significant events that have happened just recently as well with the James Webb Telescope. I mean, we're going to have views of that on the 15th of July, so that's a significant day that's coming. Then just recently, just this week, the Georgia guide stones and them being destroyed. Whoopee. Then the UFO whistleblowers, and there's many things. There's from 𝗪𝗡𝗪𝗓 talking about 𝗪𝗘𝗔𝗥's predictions about those being destroyed has actually come true. Then there's the song, which I know you put out as well, with the Black Eyed Peas, Don't You Worry. I mean, all of these kind of things, it is not a coincidence. It's something as a kind of an eye-opener and a wake-up call for those that want to kind of join this journey and to start questioning things and start applying some critical thinking. So, yeah, on that note, Dr. 𝗪𝗡𝗪𝗧, you've been a fantastic guest, our 91st guest, and I guess I could talk to all night long, but you have you have many other things to do, and there's so many questions I haven't asked, but I mean, we just have to close this off now. I wish you great success and the event that's happening in October. And just a quick one on that. You mentioned Alex Collier and Elena Danaan and others. Have you actually met any of them in person?
I've met Alex a few times.
Okay.
Elena, I've met Tony Rodriguez as well. I've met him, and �𝗔𝗖𝗪𝗧 Moyen I've met. So yeah, a lot of these people I've met. Some of them. Some people I will be meeting for the first time, Elena, in person, but we've talked and done quite a number of face-to-face over Zoom.
Yeah, you'll have to have a trip to Ireland, right? And actually, Carmen is in Ireland as well, so I'm sure Carmen would love to meet Elena and yourself at an event. And she's actually an event host. I mean, she puts on lots of events, so maybe something worth discussing, connecting, and seeing if you could do some event in Ireland as well.
Absolutely. I loved, I mean, your talk, very interesting. And also, are you on Clubhouse?
I'm not sure. Clubhouse, I think that's some sort of social networking. I'm not part of that.
You're not part, because, James, I was just thinking, I mean, even this, just this talk that you have today and any other, like, you attract people from all over the world. And it is like a live podcast where you can either choose that you do your talk and you don't have anybody asking you questions, or you have your talk and then you get people to ask you questions, but it's like real time. And it's, I think it will be quite, you will attract a lot of people. And there are different topics, depends on what are your interests. So people will choose whether, let's say they want spiritual or marketing, or there is one that is a club that is called the Preservation of the Human Race. And it has more than 40,000 people in that club. And they do talks about 24 hours a day. I mean, talks about all what is happening and all this about awaken people, all about also, against, well, not, I mean, against, I mean, about the, this so-called vaccine and all those kind of things. So anyway, I think, James, maybe you can send the link of the Clubhouse and invite him, because definitely.
I mean, we should all connect. I mean, share the details on how people, Michael, how people can connect with you. And I mean, Clubhouse is basically a voice only. It's not a video like this, and it is on an app on your phone. It was originally just for iPhones, but now it's across iOS and Android. And basically you can set your own group up and talk about any subject you want, and then you get your followers and so on. But I mean, it does attract thousands and thousands of people. And so it's a great way to get your message out. And if someone hosts it for you, I mean, you just have to turn up. I mean, you don't have to worry about getting the audience. They've done it for you. So, I mean, it is a good way to also share your message.
Definitely, yes. Please let me know, and I'll be happy to share it with the new audience, people that aren't aware of this information. I'll be very happy to kind of like present it to them.
Yeah, I think the more people that know what's going on, and then the more that maybe there's a lot of people that have no idea, but it's a good kind of an intro. That's why we wanted to keep this kind of discussion kind of easy going rather than jump straight in at the deep end, or you just confuse people. And that's not the idea. It's about kind of bringing them up to how you got involved, who are you, and then from there they can follow you and whatever. But we also want to promote this in a way that we want the audience to be bigger, because it make our life easier, and the people don't just look at us and start laughing, oh yeah, you conspiracy theorists, and go away, you fool. I mean, it's maybe 10 years ago, or even 2 years ago, that would have been the case. But I think more and more now, people are waking up and starting to ask questions, and people don't always have the answers, but you can point them in the right direction.
Yeah, and I can help you also, so I put you in contact with whoever has one of the biggest clubs in Clubhouse. And then from there, James, maybe as well, create your own club, and then you start getting people in your club. So yeah, let's, I'll contact you as well, Michael and James. We can follow up this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good way to get extra visibility and to get your message out there. You also, I noticed on your emails that you have a message. The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose and it'll defend itself.
Yes, exactly. It's like we are seeding the truth amongst so many people, even though they might not be very supportive, or they might even be hostile. Just the fact that you speak your truth and just let it go. It's like a seed. It'll just grow in people, and when the right time is there, that seed will grow into something that will get people's attention. So yeah, I think that kind of aphorism is very appropriate.
Yeah, I do. I think it's a perfect thing to end on as well, because some people won't always accept what you say, but you've seeded that thought, and maybe they'll go back and think, well, someone actually said something about that. Let me go and check it up. Or other events will happen, and then they'll start to question again and thinking, right, that actually has some substance behind it now. So on that note, Michael, any closing comment?
Well, thanks for giving me this opportunity to meet you, James, and to meet the audience. I appreciate it. It's always actually fun to meet with people. I do regret having to be in this lockdown phase where I haven't been able to travel and meet people at conferences. So these kinds of virtual gatherings are a great way of kind of like just getting to meet new people.
I completely agree. And the way that we do it is slightly different, but it's a way, it's interactive. I know that you've said in previous interviews, you like people asking you questions. You've got so much knowledge to share. And I want to kind of extract that from you. So I am so fascinated about what you do, and I will be following you. And I know that you're surrounded by some great people as well that all think alike. So on that note, you've been our 91st guest, so thank you very much for that. And yeah, good luck with your event in October, and I'm sure that'll be a great success.
Thank you. Thanks and aloha.
Right, thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Wow, that was another featured business brought to you by Visibility Impact. If you'd like to be our next featured guest or learn how James Moffat can help you leverage on the art and power of interactive storytelling for your business, reach out and schedule a call now.